Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most fundamental and frankly, completely mind-bending paradoxes of human existence. We're going to be pulling from the frameworks in H.S. Reyah's incredible book, The Dusk Analyst. We're looking at a macro perspective of human achievement. And let me tell you, this is going to completely shift how you view your own mind, your desires, and your whole place in the world. So I want you to start by asking yourself this one central mystery. How exactly does a weak, relatively defenseless ape actually manage to get to the moon? I mean, really look at us. We're a species that's barely 300,000 years old. Individually, we're incredibly fragile. And yet, our footprints are sitting up there right now in the lunar dust. How does the math on that actually work? Okay, let's dive into this cognitive dissonance for a second. On one side, just imagine our baseline biological state, right? A totally naked, unequipped human being. And then on the other side, a Saturn V moon rocket. It's a machine of such staggering complexity that it honestly almost defies comprehension. When you contrast what we are as isolated biological organisms against our ultimate technological achievements, you realize there's this massive gap. Something just doesn't quite add up. Which brings us to part one, the fragile human, and stripping away our technology. Because to really see this clearly, we've got to isolate the individual. We need to strip away absolutely everything that comes from outside the body. We're talking culture, tools, history, even our inherited knowledge of how to build a simple fire. When you look at the raw specs of a baseline human being, well, it's honestly a little bit embarrassing. We have eyesight that's vastly inferior to a hawk's. We're infinitely slower than most apex predators. Our sense of smell, completely laughable compared to a wolf. We've got weak limbs, no fur to protect us from the cold, and absolutely no claws. In raw, biological terms, any reasonably competent wolf would completely outclass us. So, part two, our impossible achievements where the math doesn't add up. This brings us right to our core problem. If we're so physically weak and limited on an individual level, how on earth do we build structures of such staggering complexity? Just look at this number, 2,500. That is the number of years of continuous, accumulated mathematical development required before a lunar rocket could even be conceived on paper. Think about that. The Apollo missions weren't just the product of a space agency in the 1960s. No, they required 2.5 millennia of constant shared human processing. Let's move through this and see how it builds across time. In antiquity, civilizations were doing complex work without even having the concept of zero. Then, numerals are developed in India in the 5th century, they're transmitted to the Arabic-speaking world by the 9th, and eventually they reach medieval Europe. The equal sign? That isn't even invented until the 16th century. Mathematics is this massive architecture that no single human built. No single human fully designed it. It assembled itself through millions of minds across centuries. And, it's not just math. Look at the language I'm speaking to you right now. English contains roughly 1 million words, this incredibly subtle grammar, and a layered history of borrowings from a dozen other languages. No single master architect sat down one day and invented English. It assembled itself across a vast medium, through millions of individuals who were literally just getting on with their daily lives, making tiny, unconscious adjustments that were either kept or discarded by the collective over time. Moving on to part three, the unseen colony, and how we are nodes in a larger medium. This brings us to a massive paradigm shift from our source material. These macro achievements, going to the moon, math, cities, language, they do not belong to individual minds. The source material calls the medium they do belong to the collective. But it's absolutely vital to understand that this isn't just some static historical archive or a dusty library of the past. It is a live, dynamic field. Every single day, your brain produces vastly more sensory data and mental surplus than your conscious mind ever actually uses. So where does all that surplus go? It continuously feeds this living ocean. We are reading from it, and we're writing to it constantly. And this brilliantly illustrates our true position. The book notes that we are, in an unflattering but perfectly accurate metaphor, ants who do not see the colony. An individual ant doesn't know it's building a complex ventilation system, right? It just follows a local chemical trail. The individual ant is dim. But the colony? The colony is doing differential calculus on supply chains. Our individual brains are the ants, and the collective is the colony that's actually building the moon rockets. And hey, if you think human exceptionalism is the reason for all this, take a look at this. We are very, very late arrivals to this party. Modern humans have only been contributing to this collective for about 300,000 years. Mammals have been feeding it for 200 million years. And the earliest nervous systems, they started depositing their mental surplus 500 million years ago. We just happen to be the loudest, most dense contributors right now, but we certainly didn't invent this medium. Let's get into part 4, the invisible leashes, and how the collective actually steers us. Now, what's really interesting about this is it leads to a fascinating question. If this massive medium is the one doing the real building, how does it actually steer these billions of fragile little ants to do the heavy lifting of civilization without us even realizing it? Well, it uses biological leashes. What we consider deeply personal feelings are actually mechanisms of control. Curiosity? It isn't just an itch in your brain. It's the colony driving you to explore and make new contributions. Loneliness forces us into the social density required to build complex structures. Pain protects your body, the vessel, so you can keep working. And joy? That's simply the collective rewarding you for a useful contribution. Because we're complex creatures, these basic leashes get elaborated. Think about your career ambition. Feels uniquely yours, right? Well, actually, it's just an ancient drive for status and resources, wearing a modern corporate costume. That deep romantic longing? Just a mechanism to bind nodes together long enough to reproduce. And what about that sudden, dreadful 3 a.m. anxiety? That is an ancestral vigilance against predators, echoing from a time when we were actually prey, firing off right there in your modern bedroom. So the crucial point here is that our own autonomous desires, our unique character traits, our grand ambitions, they are very often just the collective using us to build its architecture. We constantly mistake the pull of the leash for our own independent free will. We do the work, sure, but the goals? The goals belong to the medium. Which leaves us with a truly profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If your deepest desires, your ambitions, and even your sudden anxieties are just invisible leashes guiding you to build a structure you can't even fully comprehend, whose work are you really doing today? Are you making your own choices? Or are you just a very loud, very efficient ant in an unseen colony? Keep that in mind the next time you feel the leash pull. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the source of your own mind.